My father used to tell us something when I was growing up, something that I've never forgotten, and that is to assume that you are going to live. And think of that as you are going to have to deal with the consequences of whatever decision you make next. Most people, let's say not most, but many people make decisions as if they are not going to live long enough to face the consequences. They take the short-term win. They avoid the short-term pain. And they optimize for today. And then they forget the cause, the calling that is drawing them to the distance. And years later, after making all of those short-sighted decisions, they only feel the effects. My name is Colin Charles. This is Enoch Marketing, and this is Law 6, the short-sighted self. Today we're talking about what Robert Greene writes called the short-sighted self. He refers to this as the enemy of the law of elevated thinking. This is the part of us that reacts to what is directly in front of us. That which chases immediate relief, avoids immediate pain, and makes decisions based on how things feel today, rather than where they are going. His historical anchor in this chapter is Queen Elizabeth I. She inherited a kingdom in total chaos. The country was in the midst of a religious war, on the brink of financial ruin, and had enemies at every border. Every advisor around her was reacting to the immediate crisis, while Elizabeth was playing the long game. She refused to be rushed into decisions that felt urgent. She absorbed the pressure without reacting. She always saw 10 moves ahead when everybody around her saw 2. And as a result, she built one of the most stable reigns in all of English history. Greene writes, "The ability to see further than others, to take the long view, is the single most important quality that you can develop as a leader." Which leads me to think about the concept of the infinite game. I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek, and he wrote a book called The Infinite Game. And his argument is this, that there are finite games and there are infinite games. A finite game has defined players, fixed rules, a clear winner and loser. Sports, military objectives, a WOD, all of these things are finite games. Infinite games have no final score. No judges, no winner. The only goal of an infinite game is to stay in the game long enough to keep playing. Business is an infinite game. Life is an infinite game. Sinek writes, "In an infinite game, there are no winners. There are only players who drop out. The goal is not to beat your competition. Your goal is to outlast them." Now here's the insight that connects directly to CrossFit owners. The two largest groups of entrepreneurs in this country tend to be either former athletes or military veterans. And these groups have been trained their entire lives to think in finite games. For example, if you're playing a sport, you got your rules, objectives. I was a big football guy. You have your roles, you have your time, you have every single little bit defined for you. There's a clear winner and there's a clear loser. And oftentimes we hate to see a tie. In the military, it was still very similar. There was mission objectives, defined outcomes, courses of action, all of those things. And we measured that of whether or not we hit our objectives or we didn't. That type of training is an asset in the gym, and it's an asset on the field, and it's an asset in a WOD. But it becomes a liability when it runs the business. Because business is the infinite game. If you take a finite game mindset into an infinite game, you will optimize the wrong objective every time. In an infinite game, you have to think, what is my long-term objective that will keep me in this game longer? Now, speaking of long-terms, we're going to talk about delayed gratification. When I was growing up, we oftentimes talk about delayed gratification as the good that comes in doing something and waiting. So one must understand that delayed gratification can be positive and it can be negative. We oftentimes think about it as positive, right? Sacrifice now, gain later. But bad decisions that are made today may not always produce its consequence immediately. And they often can yield horrible results down the line. So you may not feel it, but you will feel it. And the consequences of bad decision making up front, which may look like short-term wins, may lead to worse consequences the longer you wait to face the problem. Every problem, every lie, every poor judgment only gets worse over time. So the membership that starts declining in year 3 often traces back to a decision you made in year 1. The brand that loses its relevance over the course of a decade also often traces back to a series of short-term wins that felt right at the beginning. The body that breaks down at 50 often traces back to habits, behaviors, training that was poor in your 20s and 30s. You have to think, how am I going to have to deal with this, assuming that I live? Because when you forget the cause, you will only feel the effect. Friedrich Nietzsche, which I'm actually a big Friedrich Nietzsche fan as well, said, "A person with a strong enough why can endure almost anyhow." The long-term vision is where you find your why. And when that vision is clear enough, the difficulty in the present becomes more survivable. And when it is absent, the present difficulty becomes disqualifying. Because without a vision, people perish. This is why it's so important to understand that your dreams are possible, that the future is possible, that there is more to this existence than the present moment. You must define the vision. Assume that you will live to see it, and then reverse engineer from there. Start with the end in mind. Plan all the way to the end. Know what your strategic losses you can accept today in order to achieve your objective in the long game. So this is where we're going to get a little controversial. I am wearing my CrossFit Level 1 shirt right now, but this is my thoughts on what CrossFit did to shoot themselves in the foot. So I want to show you how this works on an institutional level. CrossFit is not new. It's been around for, 4 or 5 decades now, if not longer. It started as a workout, and it became a sport. It really kind of took off, at least what I've seen, it blossomed in like the 2010-ish era. And it became a movement, and there were affiliate gyms all over the world. The CrossFit Games became the pinnacle of human fitness. And since then, 2010s-ish, there's been a decade where not quite. They've recently begun to introduce RX Plus workouts. And the idea is sound, right? So you have your athletes. A lot of times your athletes become repeat athletes, your Justin Medeiros of the world, your Nick Matthews, sometimes your Matt Frasers, whomever. And we create RX Plus workouts to show where CrossFit is going. And we've worked so hard, we've grown so much. This is the next phase. It's a sound idea. Keep the games interesting by making the competition harder at the top levels. Make it harder programming. Make it so that RX Plus becomes what we all want to see. All right. So the idea being RX Plus today will become standard RX in 2 years. And that's a rough approximation, right? So the athletes are getting better. But there's a second order effect. The consequence that they clearly didn't think through. And that is when you raise what is standard in an RX workout, you raise the bar for entry itself. So again, if we have RX scaled foundations and now we have RX Plus, and we're assuming that we're going to shift up, then the bottom has to come up as well. But here's the marketing problem we haven't thought through yet, is that when you raise the standard of RX, you raise the standard for everybody, and then 3 years down the line, that gap between the top and the bottom has grown, And the surrounding potential of athletes only sees the top. So now you've created this gap where it's a harder entry point for athletes to join CrossFit. Because you're not like, oh shoot, I can do, what is it, triple touch and flipping over the bar backwards. If people look at that and say that's not possible, they're no longer going to try. So now, because they've pushed so far into this RX plus bit, it becomes more difficult for there to be more athletes. Because the general population, the person who just wants to move well, to feel good and belong to something, looks at said workouts and concludes that CrossFit is not for them. So CrossFit, in an attempt to serve its best athletes better, which is a short-term win, caused a gap that new people can't join. And the third order consequence is that now you have a smaller pool, because now only the athletes who are already into that CrossFit lifestyle are there, making it a more exclusive sport. And that contracting audience is detrimental in the long term, especially as athletes begin to retire, because a master's athlete's 35 years old. And in that gap that was created by focusing so hard on RX Plus and making things so hard, other competition has swooped in, like High Rocks. The growth of High Rocks is absolutely the effect of the gap being too hard for CrossFit. And if you want to disagree with me, with High Rocks not all CrossFit movements with lots of running in between, what should have happened is CrossFit should have looked at other highly successful sports: baseball, basketball, football, hockey. The rules of these sports have not changed unless they absolutely had to, primarily because of CTE. The entry standard for those sports has stayed consistent for generations. So now new athletes can always find their place in the sport. And the audience then grows because the entry level is the same. If CrossFit wanted a long-term strategy, they needed to let the competitors get bigger and get better and keep the entry level constant. That way, you would just have more people coming to the sport, seeing that it's possible and exceeding from there, as opposed to trying to always make it harder. Putting this in one elevated perspective. By pushing too much to try to appease the top athletes, you've cut off the people at the bottom. Because you cut off the people at the bottom, you have a smaller pool. The sport then dies because there's no one filling in the bottom. Long-term thinking was said, just keep it the same, because people will continue to join for generations. Now, the decision that they made by making RX harder, that's not the wrong decision in isolation. It was just the wrong context of an infinite game that they were playing. And that's the distinction between a decision that is locally correct and globally wrong, and the elevated perspective that is designed to be globally right. So, a decision that affects the entire, not only you, but everybody in your community, and everybody in your community across a horizon of time. I hope that wasn't super confusing. Anyway, this is why you should care. This is a vision question. I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to answer it honestly. Where do you want your gym to be in 10 years? Not this year, not 2026, not 2027, not even 2029. What does your gym look like in 2036? And have you even thought about it? Is your gym still yours, or have you handed it to someone else? Are your athletes competing in the games? Do you have a huge community? Is your brand living out your tenure? Are you training the next generations of coaches from inside your community? And if you cannot answer any of those questions, then you're running a business without a destination. And a business without a destination, just like a person who doesn't see the future coming, You're going to make reactive decisions. One month, it'll be good and you make a bunch of spends. The next month, it'll be bad and you roll back the budget. Your competitors, your athletes are going to feel that. The fluctuation in prices, your members are going to feel that. Everything becomes more difficult if you don't see the long term in your business. And that flips around also for your athletes. Because I'll go ahead and say it. My goal in life is to be a sexy ass man, booty bone naked at 60 years old. That's just the truth. So when it comes to like, hey, let's burn out and run 10 miles a day every day, knowing that's going to be hard on my knees and it's going to be hard for me to recover later, that's not a good strategy. So you have to be able to think about the long-term effects of your decisions as the coach, as the business, and as the athlete. So when talking to a lot of gym owners, they go into business with a bunch of ideals without a lot of definitions. Like, hey, I want to work for myself. Hey, I want to build a community. Hey, I want to make a difference. And all those things are feelings. They're not anchors. They don't produce decisions. They produce moods. And the owner that says either marketing is too expensive right now, which comes to us a lot because we're a marketing company. The gym owner that comes to us and says, hey, marketing is too expensive right now, is making a finite decision inside an infinite game. And you're optimizing for this month's budget at the expense of your decade-long brand. And I'm not saying that just say, like, you need to buy this. But that's the problem that most business owners make. If you're thinking check to check, week to week, month to month, and sometimes you have to be that way, you're never going to get to the long-term goal. All right? Sometimes you got to take strategic losses in order to make huge strategic wins. The brand that you build now will carry beyond your tenure. That's just business acumen. The money that you saved by not building may cost you everything that the brand could have comprehended into. And it is that long-term thinking that aids in creating businesses that last, and gyms that last, and bodies that last. It is no good to be a penny wise and a pound foolish. The way we would say that in America is it makes no sense to save 15 cents if it's going to cost you $1. So, long-term thinking.